Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg. Joining us today is Janine Vanderburg, and she's an anti-ageism activist who believes in the phrase, don't talk about it, be about it. She's the founder of Changing the Narrative and the CEO of Encore Roadmap. Janine Vandenberg is laser focused on countering the negative effects of ageism, reframing aging, and helping older workers with encore careers, entrepreneurship, and intergenerational teams in the workplace. Welcome, Janine.
Patricia, thanks so much for having me on. Delighted to be here.
So I ripped your bio from the headlines of all the things you're doing. I want to tell everybody what a star you are in the world of fighting ageism because it's so important. So I just, want to start out with where are we at with ageism in America?
Well, we haven't ended it yet, so I think we still have a lot of work to do. I feel like we've made so much progress in the last few years, thanks to the efforts of people like you and others who are really making an effort to get the word out there, to talk to people, to interview people, to educate people. Um, but again, I like to not just talk about it, be about it. So I feel like there's so many things that all of us can do. So excited to have this conversation with you today and hopefully inspire your many followers to feel like, oh, we can do this, we got this.
Tell us about changing the narrative and the Encore roadmap. I know they're two separate things you're working on,
They're true. So changing the narrative is basically, if you think about it, it's more kind of an initiative, and I call changing the narrative an idea. It's very often the people who talk about ageism or aging are they're gerontologists, they're researchers, they're people who, have made the study of aging their priority, but it never translates to the grassroots. So my background was in basically a career running a consulting company that worked with change makers, and I did that for over 3 decades. So I really understood how organizational change took place, how social change takes place, how community change. And I felt like we're not applying that lens to ageism. Like, how do we get person on, average person, average man or woman to actually care about ageism? And it's not simply by waving a research report in
Yes.
front of them and saying, ageism is bad and it's a bad idea. It is. But how do we get that idea out about how it affects all of us and that all of us can do something about it? So changing the narrative, basically an initiative to change the way people think and talk and act about aging and ageism, and doing it through what I call kind of public campaigns. So, for example, we did an anti-ageism birthday card campaign. Why did we do a birthday card campaign? Some people thought, well, why don't you work on something serious like workplace age discrimination? And we do, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But birthdays, right, are a universal experience. All of us go around the sun once a
Yes.
year. And
Yeah.
so if we talk about birthday cards and how societal beliefs about decline and deterioration as we get older are reflected in birthday cards, it's something concrete. It gives people something to think about, and it gives us a way to start talking about ageism. So we would do campaigns like that. We did a photo campaign because most of the images that are around about older adults aren't, they're not like people like you and me. We look at them and we say, well, who are those people? They're not relatable. Um, and we also worked on, and we do work on the serious things like workplace age discrimination, public policy, et cetera. So, for example, worked on a law in Colorado to ban employers from asking for age or graduation dates on job applications because we heard from, experienced talent that they got screened out because they would be prompted to put their graduation date, high school graduation date, right? Why do you need that? High school graduation date on an initial job application. So we do like innovative public campaigns, we do a lot of educational workshops and public policy work. Encore Roadmap for me came out of that because the thing that I've become most passionate about is how ageism shows up in the workplace. I've always been someone who's believed that, anyone should be able to really use their strengths and talents at any age. It's why I was, passionate supporter of early childhood education efforts, of women's rights, and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, to see a whole group of people pushed aside and said, oh, you have no value simply because a birthday is tick by. So I really started focusing my own efforts through Encore Roadmap on educating employers on the very strong business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. So that's kind of the difference. Change the Narrative works writ large on ageism, and we try to democratize it, if you will, and put it in the hands of everyday people to do something about it. And Encore Roadmap is really geared at employers and also older job seekers.
That was a mouthful, but it's amazing
It
because
was a lot.
yeah, changing the narrative I follow closely because which we're going to talk a little bit about, is the ageist lingo.
Right.
And like you say, the birthday cards. My next question leads into that. I want to ask you what are the factors, at play that prevents society as a whole from recognizing the value of older adults? And it ties back, which I know you could speak about, is that geezer over the hill, you turn 40, and the actual conception that people have that you are so physically diminished after 50 that you can't keep a job.
Right.
That's another pervasive problem.
Right. So it's all those things, right? Ageism is, I think what I've learned in the last few years is ageism is so pervasive in every element of our society. It is, we're surrounded by it in our media, in all of our cultural narrative. All of the story is decline and deterioration, depression, dependence. So, of course, if that's the cultural story, and that's why we called it changing the narrative, right? We want to change the story that society tells about us, but also that we tell about ourselves. So when we are surrounded by this storyline that everything is downhill, as older people ourselves, we start to believe it. But it also, employers start to believe it, healthcare providers start to believe it. If we believe it ourselves, and we call that internalized ageism, then we don't do some of the things. Like if I believe everything is downhill, why am I going to go ahead and take care of my health? Why am I going to work on fitness? Because it's all downhill anyway, right? If I, as a community leader, as an elected official, believe it's all downhill, why am I going to invest in programs for older adults to make sure that they get reskilling, upskilling to be prepared for the future of work? So it just, ageism is so pervasive in our society. I think it's a combination of a fear of aging. It is a combination of a feeling that younger people are more energetic, more productive, and all of that. And factually, we know that's not true, but it's so pervasive, and it's both reflected and reinforced every day by what we read in the media. So it's complicated.
It's very complicated. And what, I hope you and I can shout it from the rooftops. I call all of my guests on my show that we're partners
Yeah.
in getting information out. And this lack of valuing an older adult, do you think it's the fear that those powers that be have? It's their own fear about aging. It's their own fear about being viewed as somebody older or somebody that that can't compete. Because what I'm finding, I want to share this with you, is those of us, I think you called it the age world or the age space, those of us
Yeah.
who are working in the field professionally and personally on cracking this nut of eradicating ageism, we're a lot less competitive. I have noticed that both men and women in this space are collaborating a lot better than we did in our 30s, when everybody was clamoring to get to the top of the chain in our respective businesses. And that to me is so key, that we all collectively are saying, hey, this isn't okay.
Yeah. So, Patricia, you were singing my song. I mean, one of the things that I know from my background in social change is it never works if you just have a bunch of solo performers, right?
Yes.
We need, it's called in the social change world, collective action towards collective impact, right? And so, if we know collectively what we really want to do is end ageism, and let's say we want to tackle like one or two things a year, right? Tackling all of it is too big, but let's say this year we really want to focus on, and this is something I've tried to insert in conversations. We know that it's an election year. And one of the things I've tried to do is insert into every campaign discussion, whether it's local, state, national, what are our people's stances on workplace age discrimination laws? What are people's stances on strengthening our workforce development system so that we are retraining people of all ages, right? The future of work is changing so dramatically. We've got AI dramatically changing things. We've got all of these shakeups in all kind of industry. It's not just younger people who need to be trained. We all need to be trained in how to do this, right? And so, to me, what is the role of government in doing that, and what can elected officials do? So that's an example, like if we all focused on that. Another year, we might focus on media narrative, right? One of the things that I love to do is, and we do this on, I know we're connected on LinkedIn, but when something really outrageous comes out on LinkedIn, I just like messaging a few of my anti-ageism friends and say, hey, do you want to weigh in on this, right? Because we know, like, for example, we got the job platform Indeed to take down a really awful article that showed in career stages, people between the ages of 55 and 65 in decline stage.
Oh boy.
We had a few people weigh in. This happened literally Friday before
Oh,
Labor
okay.
Day week. And so I got a few people to weigh in, and within 24 hours, they had taken it down and apologized. But those are the kind of things, right, that if we work together, we can happen. And that's why platforms like yours and what you're doing is so important, because it provides an opportunity to amplify the message, right?
Thank you.
Beyond the usual suspects.
Yeah. I really want to delve into the systemic belief that we have about ourselves as we
Right.
age. How do we fix this? I'm just going to pull a few things in my notes,
Yeah.
your notes. I'm too old. I can't do that at my age. Act your age. That's only for young people. No one wants
Right.
an old lady around. If I go back to school or I learn a new skill, by the time I'm done, I'll be 50, I'll be 60, I'll be 70. And the old
Yeah.
joke, you're going to be 60 or 70 anyway, you might as well do.
Right.
But how do we fix this? I'm guilty of it. I have to tell you, as much as I think as evolved I am in this, every once in a while I'll say, well, I'm going to be 64 soon. Should I really be doing this? I do it to myself. I'll be honest.
So what you want to do is look in the mirror and say, yes, Patricia, you should. So I'll start with a brief story. I had a really powerful role model around this. And literally, when she was nearing her 60s, my mother, who had always wanted to go to college, but she grew up in an immigrant family that sent the boys and not the girls to college. She had always wanted to go to college. And so she looks at my dad. She goes, Ray, I'm going to college. And I think he was a little bit stunned and taken aback. Right? The kids were at a house they're supposed to be traveling. And he's like, okay. And she started local university. She graduates 4 years later, magna cum laude, fluent, not only in her native French and English, but also in Portuguese and Spanish, because these were languages that were spoken in the community in which I grew up. So it was really important to her to be able to communicate with her neighbors. So I had this really powerful role model, right? That it's not too late. Dreams don't have an expiration date and all of that. But here's what I tell my friends. Here's what I say on stages, no matter where I am, about what we can do ourselves. And I call it the ABCs. The first thing that we need to do is we need to challenge the assumptions that we have ourselves. So, and we need to simply ask, why do I believe that, right? So if we think of the A, ask about the assumptions you have. Why do you believe you're too old? Why do you believe you can't learn something new? And one of the things that I've found is really successful with people is think of something that you learned in the last year, no matter how painfully. Okay, then think about the year before that. So why do we believe that we can't learn new things, right? So that's kind of like the A of the ABCs. In my consulting career, one of the things that I often did when I was working in communities with social change, instead of just having communities look at what's wrong with us, what's the weakness, and how do we fix that, I would have people look for what Chip and Dan Heath, the authors of Switch, called the bright spots, right? That's the B. Look for the bright spots. And I think all of us can look for, yeah, there's some things about aging that aren't so great. I look at my knee sometimes and I'm like, why did I injure my knee when I was 14 and it waited until I was 68 to really bother me? So yeah, we know there are downsides, but I can look at the bright spots. A bright spot for me is I am still connected. I'm on a text chain in this our group just with my college girlfriends, right? We were all in school together over 50 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That's a bright spot. A bright spot. I live in a house that has absolutely beautiful views. So even in a and you can see them behind me
Yeah.
here. Those are actually the views when I look out from my office. So I think, but that's something that all of us can do, no matter how big or how small it is. We can all look for the bright spots in our lives and focus on that, and then ask ourselves, how do we do more of that? And I think the final, and to me, the C is, I think it's really important for us to connect. And we've talked about a lot as a society, social isolation and the importance of connection, right? So it's important to connect with others, and I think we should all do that. But it's also, this is the perfect life stage for us to connect with what we really care about,
Mhm.
right? What drives us? What gives us meaning and purpose? One of the things I did 2 years ago is I really focused again on what do I really care about? How do I connect back with that? And to make sure that I could focus on that, I wrote what I call an anti-bucket list, right? So it's the
Okay.
opposite of the bucket list
Interesting.
that
Interesting.
we, and
Yeah.
the anti-bucket list is, here are the things I never ever want to do again. Here are the things I don't want to experience again. So the idea is not to limit experiencing new things. You still want to do that, but there are just things like that you don't want to have a conversation with that awful neighbor ever again. So what do? You go out the other entry to your house, right? You know that for me, it's doing administrative work. No, I'm not going to do that. So I'm getting a virtual assistant because I never want to file an expense report again,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, whatever it is. But by doing that, you're able to not only connect, but you're leaving time for those things you love. And I think as, one of the beautiful things and scary things about this life stage is we realize we have a shortened timeline. So let's not do things that we don't want to do. So that's how I cope with this sort of aging and internalized ageism.
I love that. I know that you approach corporations, and I'm kind of formulating from what you're telling me how to pose this is more when you are approaching a company, small or large, do you go directly to the top? Do you go to middle management? Do you go to an employee and say, how can I help you? What's the approach you take when, for lack of a better word, infiltrating the system?
Yeah. So what I do, and again, this is a lesson from this is what people don't understand really is the benefit of getting older, right? We've had these life experiences that inform how we do things now. And one of the things that I always understood in when working with change makers on how we were going to change things is it wasn't necessarily the top and it wasn't necessarily the HR person. It's like, who are the influencers within that industry? So in the same way that what are you doing? You, Patricia, are talking to influencers, right?
Right.
And you're, so that you can get the word out. Um, Sometimes those influencers are the CEOs, sometimes they're the HR person. Sometimes they're simply the person who sees something, who sees that they're maybe not tapping into a market. So we know that the longevity economy is huge, right? And that the economic power, and especially of women age 50 and over, is huge. But companies who don't have older people on their marketing teams make some really bad decisions, and they pitch things to us, and I'm sure you've had this effect. I'm
Oh,
like,
yes,
me,
yes.
do you think I possibly would wear that, would want that, or anything else? And why do you have these people who don't look like me at all pitching a product to me? So often, so maybe somebody in marketing. So there's never just one person. I've been fortunate enough because of, I think, my visibility on social media platforms and things, that people tend to come to me, and basically companies come and say, we're seeing this, can you help us? And if I can, I say yes, and if not, I refer them to someone else. But what I've found is really important, I never talk to companies about ageism. So generally, I talk about ageism. What my mission is to end ageism. But I discovered early on, if I talked to companies about ageism, legal got involved, HR got involved, everybody got really scared.
Everybody gets their back up about it. Yes.
Totally. But if we talk about what is the very strong business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. And that business case includes you're going to attract more customers. You're going to have mentorship for those young employees who are coming in. And, there was just that study that came out that hiring managers and managers in general are firing their Gen Z workers. And I'm like, well, how is that going to work out? If there's nobody there to mentor them as they come in, if you push us out, there's nobody there to mentor them. So what I found is that when we make it about the business case, employers are really receptive. And the reality is that we have more unfilled jobs now in the United States in almost every industry than we have people to fill them. So that's part of the business case as well. You can fill those jobs that right now are unfilled. That's limiting your growth. You've got really talented, experienced out here. You can do this.
Janine, that just opens up another question for me, is that I love going to Trader Joe's, and I was going to say the kids that work there are kids that are my age. They're these environments, beautiful that they hire people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s to work in the store. They're very, very good at it. Is the older adult now who are not getting the jobs or losing their jobs, are they willing to go and take jobs just to have a job? Are they willing to support new businesses or manual labor? I think that ties back into the self-ageism that someone says, well, I'm too old to go work in a makeup store. I'm too old to go work in retail. No, you're not. That's what I say. You can go get a job in a retail store. You can get a job at Amazon. You can get a job at Trader Joe's.
So I think it's not one size fits all, right? We all have different interests.
Right.
I know, for example, when I was in college, I was a waitress once. And literally for one night, and I got fired because I was really good at spilling things on people, right? So the idea that I would take a job in the restaurant if I were looking, I just
yeah.
So I think we all know what our strengths and skills are, right? But I think ageism gets in the way, but also I think it's the way employers tend to kind of see older workers. So some have those stereotypes, and that's why a lot of my education is on breaking down those stereotypes and saying, that simply isn't true. But part of it is as well and I think I call it a mismatch, right? And this is true. It's not just for older people. It's true for everybody of all age. We've got this incredible mismatch. The future of work is changing like this, right? Minute by minute. And our workforce development systems, our training systems aren't keeping up. And that's why, so part of it is, I work on a person to company level talking to employers, but I also am really pushing for policy change we need to change policies that only have internships and apprenticeships for younger people because we don't have enough younger people in this country to fill what needs to be filled. And there are a lot of people and AI is a great example. I met this guy, and I'm going to write about him on LinkedIn next week. I met him at a conference that we were both at 2 weeks ago. This guy was an executive chef for Hilton for 40 years, right? Can't stand on his feet anymore and that kind of thing. But this guy figured out how to use AI, and now he's like producing cookbooks. Now, I can't cook. If I looked up AI recipes, best Portuguese recipes, I'm going to be vacationing in Portugal soon. I would look at the output and I'd have no idea whether it was good or not, but this guy's an executive chef, so he can filter out, right? And that kind of thing. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for those of us who are older to really use AI, but we've got to break through this stereotype that if we're older, we're digitally incompetent, we can't do it. So
I'm going to speak to that real quick before I get to the next question. My brother, Steve Greenberg, shout out Thin Client Computing. He's based in Arizona, and that's exactly what he does. He holds conferences. He travels all over the world teaching people how to use tech. And I had him on, and I said, well, what's the story with older people? He said, has nothing to do with your age. The technology is changing every minute. There's something new. He says, we don't have, we get devices. We don't know what to do. And this is our area of expertise. And we have the same learning curve. So whether you're 15 or whether you're 50 or whether you're 75, we all have a big learning curve with tech. So people, the first thing they say is, I'm too old, or I'm too stupid, or this is for the kids. He said 100% that's not true. That it's that kids are more experienced at handling devices because they grew up with them,
Yeah.
but we can learn it just as easily. So that was
I
one.
want to get a quote from your brother from my
Yeah,
LinkedIn. I'm going to
I'll
do
put them together
wait.
with you. But
Yeah,
that was one disconnect that really brought
yeah,
it together for me. Is that
right,
we're all flipped out about technology that
right,
we can't handle it. So that
right.
is interesting, and I love your story about the chef. So Janine, give us just some concrete examples of how we can connect and how we can make a difference.
So I think for all of us, and I just talk a lot about connection and speaking up.
Mhm.
And I think all of us have a voice, and we all have voices in different arenas.
Yeah.
We may have a voice on a formal platform like you do, Patricia, with your podcast. We may have, I tend to have a voice from the stage and I write a lot. Other people have voices, maybe in their communities as community leaders in their neighborhood groups. We all have groups of friends or whatever. So all of us have a voice. And all of us as well have a mirror. So the first thing that I think we need to do is speak up to ourselves in the mirror every morning,
Right.
right? When those ageist thoughts come in, we need to say, no, Janine, you can learn new things. Remember how your mom did. She went back to school. Or remember that you mastered that new piece of tech last week, right? So we need to speak up to ourselves. We need to speak up in environments. So I'm a big believer in connecting and speaking up to media. If I see a really ageist ad, I'll let people know. It can be really simple to just write a short email and get it off to someone and say, you're trying to sell a product and you're trying to appeal to me, but I find the way that you're doing really ageist. And the reality is when you do that, people pay attention. I'm really hoping that a lot more people speak up on the policy front. And I write a lot about the importance of strengthening our workplace age discrimination laws, of strengthening our workforce development systems, which are paid for with our tax dollars, to make sure that older people who want to stay in the workforce, and a lot of us want to for meaning and purpose, and a lot of people need to for money, right? So there are a number of reasons. But we need to let workforce development centers and our elected officials know we want our taxpayer-funded workforce development systems to provide the kind of training and upskilling that maybe some older adults need. And we need to let our elected officials know that they need to pay attention to the issues that we care about, like workplace age discrimination, like caregiving, and all of those kind of things. So to me, it's about any of us can speak up. We have a lot of tools on the Changing the Narrative website, and that's changingthenarrativeco.org. So if anybody, wants to look, and then people can find me on LinkedIn, Janine Vanderburg. And I've got a sometimes weekly, sometimes twice a week newsletter where I write about all of the Encore Roadmap workforce topics and that kind of thing.
And I'll
So,
put that all on when we put the show up. I'll
okay,
put all those
great.
links. Janine, there's so much to talk about, but I do have to wrap up at some point.
Yeah,
I really quickly wanted to talk about in your Changing the Narratives initiative about the language
yeah,
we use. Seniors, silver tsunami, blue
great.
hair ladies, over the hill, geezer, all this kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So some of it, so I want to kind of separate categories of words. There's
Okay.
words that were studied, and that's kind of like part of the quote reframing aging initiative. There's an organization called Frameworks Institute. They're based in DC, and all that they do is literally study how language and messages affect people's perception of issues. So they did some research, and now it's about a decade ago, that showed that terms like seniors, senior citizen, elderly, conjure up all the negative stereotypes about older people. So we can certainly choose to use them, but we need to know when we choose to use those kind of terms, that we are perpetuating stereotypes, right, about older adult. And the preferred terms are older adults or older person, or simply being descriptive language. So for example, if I have a boat club for people age 60 and over, as opposed to saying this is a senior boat club, I could simply say this is a boat club for people age 60 and over who, want to boat on this particular lake. That's kind of one part. Things like silver tsunami or gray wave, or my personal favorite, going off the demographic cliff, somehow suggest that in
Oh, I
age
haven't heard that one. Wow.
Oh, it somehow it suggests that, an aging population is kind of a problem. And when you think about it, what does the word tsunami mean, right? It's sudden, it's unexpected, and it devastates everything in its path. And the reality is that we've known about the aging of America and the world for a really long time. So the way I see it is that aging isn't, an aging population isn't a disaster. It's not an economic burden. It's an opportunity for society to tap into the insights and experience, right? The kind of thing, the insight and experience that you have, I have, and so many others have. So we want to move away from any of those terms that suggest demographic disaster and things like, and I'm sorry, geezer, all of those things. It's like, just know if they're, if you wouldn't, I like to think about it, if you wouldn't want someone to call you that name, don't use it. There's a little golden rule about it, but really,
Yeah, that's the thing about casting stones. Absolutely.
there's absolutely there's no need to do it. So, I've written a number of things about language. I'm happy to send you a link. You can include it. But and then another one that we haven't talked about is when people use the word still. So I get a lot of, at age 71, I get a lot of, oh, you're still working? I thought you were retiring. And I'm like, no, I left my consulting firm to start an anti-ageism initiative, but I'm hardly retired. I'm working now more than ever. So, yeah, we need to stop. Are you still exercising? Are you
Yes,
still
yes.
hiking? Are you still, whatever it is? Yes, I'm still doing all the
And
things.
it's with disdain sometimes. I can't believe you still do
Right,
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right,
It's
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Janine, this has just
Yeah.
been unbelievably informed. There's so many takeaways. I don't even know if there's one certain one, but the one that I feel that I can take away is that it's a beautiful thing to age and it's a wonderful thing to age, and that we have so much to offer with age.
Yeah.
People use these catch terms. So of course, I want you to tell me what you like about getting older.
So I think what I like the most about getting older, and I really had, so I think you're the first person to ask me that. And I think that says something as well, Patricia, because I think very often people don't want to admit that they're getting older, so they don't want to say. I have had this quality all of my life. And when I took the Strength Finder test about 2 decades ago, it's called the Activator. And the shadow side, and I have a bias for action, right? Like
Yes,
it's what
yes.
you led with. Don't talk about it. Let's do something, right? And the shadow side of that is called being impatient. And I always have known I've been impatient, and it was something I worried about, right? My team at my consulting firm would say, yes, she's futuristic. She sees the future, and then she's asking us why it didn't happen yesterday, right? So that was perceived to be a negative thing. And now I'm realizing what I like about getting older is actually embracing, understanding that's not only part of my DNA, but it's kind of my superpower. It's what allows me to do things like changing there. It's what allows me to do things to influence people to come with me to get things changed. So, what I like about getting older is I've finally realized I need to stop apologizing for that trait and just say, this is who I am. And by the way, here's the good thing. Look at the stuff we've gotten done.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And Janine, I want to thank you so much for joining me. This has been incredibly informative and enlightening. And I just want to tell the audience, for more information about Janine Vanderburg and fighting ageism, you can go to changingthenarrativeco.org or visit Janine's LinkedIn profile. She's available everywhere because she's a superstar in this field. And again, Janine, thank you. And I look forward to more conversations about this.
Patricia, thanks for inviting me.
My
It's
pleasure.
really been lovely chatting with you.
And I want to thank all of you who are listening. I'm Patricia Greenberg. And for more shows on aging well, please subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And for more information, feedback, and topic ideas, you can contact me at www.patriciagreenberg.com. Stay well and stay safe.